My name is Caroline Morgan. I'm 29, and last month I sat down at a family dinner that changed everything. You know, the kind of meal where the food is warm, the table looks familiar, but the words cut deeper than any knife. My brother had just been promoted, Mom was glowing with pride, and then he turned to me. Sit quietly. You'll never be successful like me. Everyone laughed except me. I stayed calm because I knew something they didn't. Have you ever been dismissed at your own table, treated like you'd never measure up? Stay with me, because before that night was over, one word from the man my brother admired most would turn his laughter into silence. I had not stepped inside my mother's dining room in years. Yet the moment I did, memories rushed back as if I had never left. The faded floral curtains, the clock on the wall that always ran a little slow, and the oak dining table scratched from years of family meals all stood exactly where they had always been. But the air was not the same. It was heavy, tense, thick enough to cut. Mom placed a tray of roasted chicken at the center of the table, the smell of rosemary and garlic filling the room. I sat in my old seat across from my brother Michael. He was dressed like a man who had something to prove, a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to show off the expensive watch on his wrist. Every so often he adjusted it like a quiet reminder to us that he had arrived, that he was someone now. Orion really knows how to spot talent, Mom said proudly, her eyes glowing as if she had been the one promoted. Michael was just made project manager. Not everyone gets that kind of trust at 32. Michael leaned back with a satisfied grin. He didn't need to say much. His posture, the smug tilt of his chin, said enough. I wasn't surprised. I had seen that look my whole life, the look of someone who believed the world revolved around him. I quietly picked up a piece of potato, but before I could even chew, Michael swirled his wine glass and turned toward me. And what about you, little sister? His voice carried that fake tone of curiosity. Still drifting? Or have you finally figured out what you want to do with your life? Mom's smile faltered, but she didn't step in to stop him. Instead, she gave a small, awkward laugh, the kind that suggested she didn't disagree. I swallowed slowly, forcing calm into my voice. I'm fine. I'm working, I'm managing. Michael chuckled, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of laugh meant to sting. He leaned back further, resting his elbow on the chair as if he owned the space. The best thing you can do is sit quietly, he said, pausing on each word like a knife being twisted. You'll never be successful like me. The room fell silent. Forks stopped mid-air. Mom cleared her throat nervously, eyes darting between us. I didn't flinch. I looked directly at him, not with anger, but with something steadier, something he wasn't expecting. I wasn't angry. I had heard versions of that sentence too many times from him. But this time, watching him bask in his own arrogance, I felt a strange calm, because I knew something he didn't, a truth that neither he nor Mom nor anyone at that table had the slightest idea about. To break the silence, Mom quickly shifted back to him, asking about his new project. Michael launched into it eagerly, talking about connections and networking events, his voice swelling with pride as he painted himself the savior of his company. I sat quietly, letting his words wash over me. Caroline, maybe you should go to these events, Mom added, looking my way. You could learn from your brother. Find a little inspiration. You can't just coast forever. I set my knife down. My palms were damp, but my tone stayed even. I'll think about it. Then the door swung open. Bill, our longtime neighbor, stepped in with a stack of misplaced mail. Evening, he said, handing it to Mom. Looks like this ended up in my box again. Mom thanked him warmly, but before leaving, Bill glanced at Michael. Heard you got a promotion at Orion. Congratulations, son. Michael's chest puffed up just a little more, but Bill didn't stop there. His eyes shifted to me. And Caroline, I saw your name on the guest list for the Orion Gala next month. That right? The dining room seemed to tilt. Michael froze, his confident smirk slipping for the first time that evening. Mom blinked in surprise, her fork suspended above her plate. I smiled softly, gave Bill a nod, and said simply, Yes, that's right. Bill excused himself and left. Silence rushed back in thicker than before. Michael tried to recover, lifting his glass, but his hand trembled just enough for me to notice. Mom stared at me as though she had never really looked at me before. That night, Michael thought he had the upper hand. He thought mocking me across that dinner table was his victory. What he didn't realize was that it was only the beginning. I sat there quiet, letting him enjoy his fleeting moment. Because soon enough, when the truth came out, his laughter would stop. And when it did, even he wouldn't know how to pick up his fork again. I still remember that day as if it had been pressed into my memory with fire. My college graduation, the one moment I had worked for through sleepless nights and long semesters, finally arrived. The campus was buzzing with families, the air electric with pride. Students in black gowns posed with parents holding cameras, bouquets, and beaming smiles. Everywhere I turned there were hugs, laughter, tears of joy. But when I stepped onto that stage to receive my diploma with honors, my eyes scanned the crowd and found only empty seats where my family should have been. No wave from Mom, no proud nod from Michael. No sign that anyone from home had come to see me walk across that stage. The applause from strangers filled the silence, but it didn't warm me. I clutched the diploma tightly as I walked back to my seat. It was supposed to feel like a victory. Instead, it felt hollow. Later that evening, when I called home, I learned the truth. Mom's voice was cheerful, almost celebratory. Michael's colleagues threw a party tonight, can you believe it? They were recognizing him for his promotion. It was so important for us to be there. I sat on the edge of my dorm bed, cap and gown still folded neatly beside me, listening to her describe how wonderful the evening had been. She didn't ask how my ceremony went. She didn't even realize she had missed the most important day of my life. That was the first time I felt it in my bones, the absolute imbalance. Michael wasn't just favored. He was the sun my family revolved around. And me, I was the satellite expected to orbit quietly, unnoticed, unseen. I replayed the moment in my head for years, the dean, shaking my hand, the weight of the honors cord around my neck, the roar of the audience that should have included my own family. That wound never closed. It only scarred over, reminding me each time I looked back why I had chosen the path I did. In the silence of my dorm that night, I made a promise to myself. If my family wouldn't recognize me, then I would find recognition elsewhere. Not through shouting or boasting, but through building a life so undeniable that even their silence couldn't erase it. The conflict inside me was sharp. Part of me longed to run back home to demand the same love and attention Michael was showered with. But another part knew the truth. If I kept chasing their approval, I would always come in second. When my roommate Sarah walked in with her parents carrying a cake that read, "Congratulations," they laughed, took pictures, and pulled me into one of the shots, even though it wasn't my celebration. I smiled for the camera, but inside I realized something: I couldn't keep waiting for my family to show up. If they chose Michael over me that day, they would keep choosing him. That night, lying awake with my diploma on the desk beside me, I decided I would carve out my own future. I didn't know exactly where it would lead, but I knew it would be mine, and I would never again let their absence define my worth. What began as a wound that night slowly became the fuel for the quiet climb I made step by step, far away from their gaze. They thought I was standing still, but in truth, I was already building something none of them could imagine. After Bill mentioned my name at the dinner table, I caught Michael's eyes flickering for a moment. He didn't ask me about it, and I didn't explain. That was how things had always been between us. He filled the air with his stories, and I filled the silence with mine. What he never realized was that my silence was not emptiness, it was protection. Years ago, when I walked away from my college graduation alone, I made a promise to myself. If my family couldn't show up for me, then I would show up for myself. That promise carried me through every decision afterward, even the ones that took me far away from Montana. I earned a scholarship to pursue an MBA in New York. It wasn't easy. I juggled 2 part-time jobs, mornings at a coffee shop near campus, nights filing paperwork at a law office. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and a radiator that hissed through winter. While other students went out for dinners, I calculated how many instant noodle packets I could buy with $10. No one back home ever asked how I was managing. Whenever Mom called, the conversation always circled back to Michael. He had just landed an internship. He had just bought a new car. He had just been noticed by someone important at Orion. I listened, smiled, and told her I was fine. I didn't tell her that I graduated top of my class again. I didn't mention that one of my professors pulled me aside and said, "Caroline, you're going places." At that point, I already knew my family wouldn't see me for who I was. They saw what they wanted, Michael the golden child, and me the shadow. After finishing my MBA, I stayed in New York. I didn't have the safety net others had, so I built my own. I started small consulting for companies that no one else wanted to touch. Defense contractors with outdated systems, startups in over their heads. I was young, but I knew how to listen. Where others rushed to talk, I studied the gaps, the flaws, the missed opportunities. One client turned into 3. 3 became 10. Eventually, I co-founded a firm with 2 colleagues. We worked in a cramped office above a deli, the smell of onions clinging to our clothes. But we worked hard and we delivered results. Back home, I kept the story simple. Still figuring things out, I'd say on phone calls. Mom would sigh and remind me how successful Michael was becoming. I let her believe it. It was easier to stay the unambitious daughter than to compete for her attention. The truth was, by the time Michael got his first management position at Orion, I was sitting across from government officials in Washington, D.C., advising them on technology risks. Our firm had grown. Investors came. Eventually, I was named chairwoman of the company. My name started appearing in articles, my face in magazines. But I made sure none of it reached my family. I kept my world separate from theirs. There was one evening I'll never forget. I was in D.C. for a conference dressed in a navy suit that finally fit the woman I had become. As I stepped off the stage after my keynote, a man approached me. He was a senior executive from Orion, the very company Michael bragged about at every family gathering. He extended his hand, smiling. "Chairwoman Johnson, it's an honor. I hope we can collaborate." I shook his hand, calm on the outside, but inside I felt a shift. For the first time, Michael's world and mine overlapped, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. But when Mom called that week, she told me about Michael's new office chair. She said he had invited her to tour his workplace and how proud she was to see his name on the door. I said nothing about my own conference, my own deals. I let her picture me as she always had, the little sister still trying to figure life out. There were times when I questioned myself. Why stay quiet? Why let them think I was the failure? The answer was simple: peace. If I told them, they would turn my victories into competitions. They would either dismiss me or try to use me. Silence kept me free. Still, the silence carried weight. At family reunions, cousins asked if I had found a steady job yet. Michael smirked in the background, pretending not to listen. I laughed it off. I had learned to wear their assumptions like a coat, heavy but familiar. They never realized that underneath I was building something none of them could imagine. One night during a gala in New York, I was introduced to Orion's CEO. He shook my hand firmly and said, "Chairwoman Johnson, your firm's insights have been invaluable. We're looking forward to a long partnership." Cameras flashed as we stood together. I knew that photo would circulate in circles Michael could only dream of entering. And yet in Montana, Mom was probably showing neighbors the new watch Michael had bought with his bonus. As I sat at that dinner table back in Montana listening to Michael's laughter, I remembered all of this. Every empty seat at my graduation, every quiet victory I had hidden, every headline I never shared. I had let them believe I was invisible. But the truth had a way of showing up even when you tried to keep it hidden. And soon Michael would discover that the failure sitting across from him was not the person he thought she was. The dining room felt smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the low ceiling, maybe it was the weight of the words that always seemed to hang in the air. Mom had filled the table with roast chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes, comfort food meant to keep peace. But peace was never what we found at that table. Michael sat across from me, leaning back like the chair belonged to him more than the house ever did. His shirt sleeves rolled neatly, the shimmer of his watch catching the overhead light every time he gestured. He was already in mid-story when I turned back in describing some meeting at Orion. The way he told it, you'd think he was single-handedly carrying the company into the future. Mom clapped her hands together softly. See, Caroline? That's what I mean by drive. Your brother never settles. He pushes, he earns, he advances. You should learn from him. Her smile was gentle, almost kind, but her words landed sharp. I swallowed, nodding once, because what else could I do? Michael smirked. Don't take it the wrong way. Not everyone's cut out for ambition. Some people are just better off in the background. He meant me. He didn't even need to say it out loud. Mom chuckled, brushing her hand across his arm. He's right, Caroline. You're smart, but you never had that hunger. You were always content just floating. That's fine for some, but it won't take you far. My fork scraped against the plate. I forced myself to lift a bite of potatoes chew swallow, as if that could keep the heat building in my chest from spilling out. I had promised myself I wouldn't reveal anything, not yet. But it was getting harder. I remembered nights in New York when I worked until dawn, contracts spread across my apartment floor, my hands shaking from too much coffee. I thought about the day I signed the deal that made my company a defense contractor for the Pentagon. That hunger they thought I lacked, it had built me into someone they couldn't imagine. But to them, I was still the quiet daughter, the one who never pushed hard enough. Remember when you tried that admin job out of college? Michael added, his tone casual, but his eyes gleaming. You hated it. Quit in 6 months. Meanwhile, I stuck it out at Orion. Look where I am now. I lifted my glass of water and smiled faintly. Yes, I remember. He leaned back, satisfied. Mom looked at me with something halfway between pity and frustration. We just want the best for you, honey. If you just listened to your brother, maybe you'd see how to get ahead. I set my glass down carefully. For a moment, silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. Michael's eyes lingered on me, waiting for me to snap. But I didn't. Not yet. The doorbell rang, startling us all. Mom stood hurrying to the front door. A moment later, she returned with Aunt Linda, her younger sister, carrying a store-bought pie. Thought I'd stop by? Linda said brightly, kissing Mom's cheek. Then she turned to me and hugged me tight. Caroline, it's been forever. Her presence shifted the air. She sat down, placed the pie on the counter, and smiled across the table. I was reading in the paper about that defense company in New York, one making headlines with a major government contract. Any chance you're connected to that? My pulse jumped. Michael's smirk slipped just a fraction. Mom frowned, puzzled. I gave Linda a small smile. I've heard of them. Then I picked up my fork, as if the question meant nothing. Linda studied me for a second, longer curiosity in her eyes, but didn't press. She moved on to chatting with Mom about neighborhood gossip. Michael didn't look away from me, though. For once, his expression wasn't smug. It was calculating. Suspicion had replaced his easy arrogance. The rest of the meal carried on, but I barely tasted the food. Mom kept praising Michael, her voice louder now, as though trying to drown out the echo of Linda's question. He played along, rattling off details of Orion's big projects. But I caught him stealing glances at me. For the first time, I realized he wasn't just looking down on me anymore. He was wondering. As I helped clear the table later, Linda pressed a pie plate into my hands and whispered, You're doing well, aren't you? I can tell. I didn't answer, just smiled. But her words clung to me as I carried dishes into the kitchen. Michael had spent the entire evening trying to paint me as the unambitious one, and Mom had fed that narrative like it was gospel. What they didn't know is that the story was about to change. Michael brushed past me as I set the plates down. His voice was low, meant only for me. What did Aunt Linda mean back there? You've got something going on, don't you? I met his eyes calm. Don't worry about it, Michael. His jaw tightened. I will worry. If you're trying to play some game, just remember you're not built for it. I dried my hands, slowly refusing to look away. We'll see. That night, as I drove back to my rental car, Linda's question echoed in my mind. Michael had always been the loud one, the favored one, the shining sun. But for the first time, I had seen something different in his face. Doubt. And that doubt was going to grow whether I wanted it to or not. A week after that dinner, life in our small Montana town fell back into its usual rhythm, church bells on Sundays, chatter at the diner, neighbors waving from their porches. But underneath, I could feel the buzz about Orion's expansion. Everyone seemed to know Michael had been promoted. He soaked up the attention like sunlight, and it made him louder than ever. So when a networking mixer was announced at the old community hall, he jumped on the chance. I hadn't planned on going, but Sarah, a friend from high school, asked me to come with her. She said it would be fun, a chance to reconnect. Part of me wanted to stay home, but another part wanted to see Michael in his natural habitat, showing off to anyone who would listen. The community hall smelled like polished wood and beer. String lights hung across the ceiling, giving everything a golden glow. Clusters of people stood with plastic cups talking about property values, job opportunities, and of course Orion. I stayed close to Sarah at first, sipping ginger ale, listening to her talk about real estate deals. My eyes scanned the room. And then Michael arrived. He was in a brand new suit, navy blue, paired with a flashy silver tie. His voice cut through the room before I even saw him. He shook hands like a politician, laughed louder than everyone else, and clapped people on the back like they were lifelong friends. People leaned into him, eyes bright, feeding off his energy. I tried to fade into the background, but Michael spotted me. His grin widened like he'd just been handed a microphone. He raised his cup. "Well, if it isn't my little sister," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Caroline, everyone. She's still figuring things out." Polite laughter rippled through the group around him. My cheeks warmed, but I stood still, refusing to shrink. Michael wasn't done. "You know, she's tried a little of everything. Admin work, side jobs, nothing that really stuck. But at least she's persistent." This time, the laughter had an edge. Neighbors grinned. One of them, a man I vaguely remembered from church, smirked like Michael had told the funniest joke of the night. I lifted my cup, keeping my smile calm. "Good to see you too, Michael." My voice was steady, but inside my pulse drummed hard. Michael leaned in just enough so his words hit me, while still loud enough for others to hear. "You'll never understand what it takes to succeed, Caroline. Stability, respect, vision. That's why you'll always be behind." His friends roared with laughter. Sarah looked away, embarrassed for me. I smiled wider. I let them laugh, because I knew something they didn't. For a flash, I remembered my office in New York. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. Military officials sitting across from me, listening while I signed agreements. They had called me Madam Chair. And here I was, standing in a small town hall, letting my brother reduce me to a punchline. Back in the moment, Sarah touched my arm. "Want to step outside?" she whispered. I shook my head. "No, I'm fine." Michael was in his element now, bragging about Orion's government contracts. He dropped names, exaggerated details, and made himself sound indispensable. People listened, nodding along, but I noticed something. Each time someone mentioned partnerships or future deals, his eyes flicked toward me. Quick, nervous. He was loud, but doubt was already gnawing at him. Then a man stepped into the circle. He wore a gray suit that looked sharper than anything else in the room. "Michael," he said warmly, shaking his hand. "Good to see you outside the office." Michael puffed up. "Mr. Reed, everyone, this is Thomas Reed, Regional Manager at Orion." Reed turned to me. "And you must be Caroline." Michael blinked. His voice cracked. "You know her?" Reed smiled politely. "I've seen her name before. Surprised to see her here, honestly." The room fell into an uneasy hush. Neighbors glanced between us, whispers starting. My smile didn't waver. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Reed." Michael laughed too quickly, his tone forced. "Yeah, my sister dabbles here and there. She's not really." But Reed didn't laugh. He studied me for a moment like he was trying to place where he'd seen me. The silence pressed heavily until Reed excused himself and moved on. The laughter didn't return. People shifted, conversations drifting awkwardly. Michael's confidence had cracked just enough for everyone to see. He clutched his cup tighter, jaw stiff. I set my drink down and excused myself quietly. As I walked out, I could feel his eyes drilling into my back, desperate, confused. Outside, Sarah caught up with me. "Caroline," she whispered, "why did that Orion manager know you?" I looked at the night sky and let the cool air settle over me. That's a story for another time. Inside, the laughter had started up again, but it wasn't the same. And Michael knew it. The invitation had come through Michael. He bragged about it for weeks, Orion's annual gala, a night of tuxedos and gowns, where the company would celebrate its new partnerships with major defense contractors. He told Mom it was the kind of event where real players showed up. He said it loud enough for me to hear, with that same smug grin he always wore when he wanted me to feel small. Mom practically begged me to come. "It'll be good for you, Caroline. You'll see what ambition looks like." I agreed, though, for reasons neither of them could have guessed. The gala was held at the Grand Helena Hotel, a marble and chandelier kind of place. Cars lined up at the valet, women in floor-length dresses gliding across the carpet, men straightening their ties as they followed. I stepped out of my rented car wearing a navy gown that fit like it had been stitched for me alone. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was powerful. The kind of dress that didn't scream but whispered authority. When I walked into the ballroom, I caught the exact second Michael saw me. His jaw ticked just slightly before he smirked and leaned toward his colleagues. "Well, look who's here," he said loudly, raising his glass. "Didn't know they let +1s invite themselves." His friends chuckled. I didn't flinch. I just moved toward the bar, ordered sparkling water, and stood tall. The chandeliers above glimmered, the music swelled, and I felt the weight of eyes flicking toward me, curious, wondering why I was there at all. Mom drifted over, touching my arm lightly. "Caroline, you look nice. Maybe tonight you'll see what success really looks like." Her smile was kind, but the undertones stung. She meant well, yet it carried the same message I'd heard since childhood. Michael was the golden child. I was the afterthought. Michael, emboldened by the attention, clinked his glass for emphasis. "Caroline," he said, his voice carrying over the music, "try not to get lost tonight. These kinds of events aren't for amateurs." His friends laughed again, the kind of laughter that sticks to your skin like oil. I turned slightly, catching my reflection in the mirrored wall. My pulse was steady. My smile is calm. I had waited for this moment longer than he could imagine. The room shifted as Orion's CEO, Richard Hale, entered. The man commanded attention without asking for it. Conversations dimmed as he moved through the crowd, shaking hands, acknowledging partners, nodding at the board members scattered across the room. Michael straightened, immediately eager, rehearsing the smile he'd practiced 100 times. He nudged his colleagues. "This is it," he whispered, "the man who makes careers." And then it happened. Richard Hale's gaze swept the room, passed over Michael, and stopped on me. His expression lit up with recognition. He strode across the ballroom, hand extended. "Chairwoman Johnson," he said warmly, his voice echoing in the quiet that had suddenly fallen. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight." The silence was heavy, absolute. Forks paused mid-air, glasses stilled. Michael froze, his smirk collapsing as if someone had knocked the air out of him. His hand jerked and the wine glass slipped crashing to the floor in a spray of red across the pristine marble. Mom's eyes widened, darting from Richard to me, trying to piece together what she had just heard. "Chairwoman," she whispered, her voice trembling. I accepted Richard's handshake, smiling with practiced ease. "It's good to see you too, Richard. I wasn't sure I'd make it, but I'm glad I did." Gasps rippled across the room. People leaned toward each other, whispering furiously. Michael's colleagues looked at him with new eyes, their admiration slipping into confusion. Michael stammered, his face pale. Wait, what?" Chairwoman Caroline Richard clapped him lightly on the shoulder, oblivious to the tension. "Yes, Michael. Didn't you know Caroline leads Johnson Defense? One of our strongest partners this year." The words fell like a hammer. The colleagues who had laughed at me minutes before now looked anywhere but at Michael. The man who had mocked me at the bar was shifting uncomfortably, his confidence draining away. I caught Michael's expression, the disbelief, the humiliation written across his face, and for the first time in years, I felt the scales tilt. Not in anger, not in triumph, but in balance. The music picked back up, conversations restarted in a low hum, but the air was different now. I could feel it. Michael had lost the room, and he knew it. Richard excused himself to greet another group, leaving Michael and me facing each other in the wake of the revelation. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His glass lay shattered at his feet, crimson staining the marble like a warning. I bent slightly, my voice calm but sharp enough for him alone. "I told you once, Michael. Sometimes the best thing you can do is sit quietly." Then I straightened, turned toward the center of the room, and let the crowd swallow me. Behind me, Michael stood frozen, the sound of his failure louder than any words he had ever thrown my way. The gala had ended, but the night was far from over. The ballroom still glowed with chandeliers and murmurs, yet I barely noticed. As soon as we stepped into the corridor, Mom grabbed my wrist and pulled me aside. Her grip was tighter than usual, her face flushed not with joy, but with something closer to panic. "Caroline," she demanded, her voice trembling, "how could you hide something like this from your own family chairwoman all this time?" Her words cut sharper than I expected. She wasn't celebrating me. She was interrogating me. For a moment, I just stared at her. The same mother who had praised Michael at every dinner table, who had brushed off my accomplishments as minor, now looked at me as though I had betrayed her. I answered quietly, steady. "You never asked Mom. You never wanted to know." The click of polished shoes echoed behind us. Michael stormed down the hall. His tie loosened his face, a mask of fury. He looked less like the golden boy of Orion and more like a man cornered. He pointed at me, his voice too loud for the empty corridor. "Do you realize what you just did? Do you have any idea how that looked? Richard Hale, the CEO himself, calling you chairwoman in front of everyone. You blindsided me. I didn't move. I didn't do anything, Michael. I simply walked into a room." He laughed bitterly, running a hand through his hair. "Walked into a room. You humiliated me. You made me look like a fraud in front of my colleagues. Now they'll think I only got where I am because of you, that I've been riding on your coattails the whole time." His voice cracked louder, faster. "If one of your contracts undermines me, if it so much as threatens my position at Orion, I swear I will never forgive you." The words hit harder than he intended. Mom gasped, stepping back as if the venom in his tone had startled even her. For the first time, her expression flickered not with certainty but with doubt. I kept my silence, not because I was afraid, but because silence carried more weight than shouting ever could. My eyes locked on his cold and unwavering. He faltered under the stare, his bravado cracking, his anger colliding with the fear he tried to bury. Mom stepped in, her voice desperate. "Enough, Michael. She's your sister. This isn't how family talks." But Michael wasn't listening. He paced like a man on the edge of losing control, pointing again. "Don't pretend like you're innocent, Caroline. You've been hiding this from us. From me. While I worked, while I built my career, you were sitting on power, waiting for the perfect moment to humiliate me." Something shifted in that moment. His mask slipped, and all the years of arrogance finally showed for what they were: insecurity dressed as pride. He wasn't the untouchable success he pretended to be. He was a man terrified of losing his spotlight. A soft voice interrupted. "You boys at Orion think you run the world." Aunt Linda stepped into view, holding her clutch, her eyes sharp, though her tone was almost gentle. She had clearly overheard enough. Her gaze landed on Michael. "But a reputation built on ego crumbles faster than you think." Michael froze, his jaw tightening. "Stay out of this," he muttered, but even he knew the damage was done. Aunt Linda didn't stay. She simply walked past us, her heels clicking against the marble, leaving the echo of her words behind like a warning. Silence fell. Michael stood rigid, his fists clenched at his sides, his chest heaving. Mom looked between us, torn, her loyalty cracking under the weight of what she had just witnessed. For years she had seen only Michael's shine. Tonight she saw the cracks. I adjusted the strap of my gown and spoke softly, each word deliberate. "This was never about you, Michael. But if you insist on making it so, then you'll have to live with the consequences." His eyes widened, but I didn't wait for his reply. I turned back toward the ballroom, letting the golden light swallow me as I left him standing in the corridor. His confidence shattered, his fear louder than any victory speech he'd ever given. The glass walls of Orion's boardroom gleamed in the morning sun, sharp and transparent, leaving no place to hide. I walked in with the other executives' heels clicking against the polished floor and settled into my chair near the head of the long mahogany table. Richard Hale, Orion's CEO, greeted me with a nod before turning his attention to the day's agenda. The air smelled faintly of leather and fresh coffee, but underneath was something heavier anticipation. This was the day the Orion team would present their portion of the joint defense contract. And at the center of it all stood Michael, my brother. He straightened his tie and cleared his throat as though preparing to deliver a speech to history itself. "Thank you all for being here," he began, voice pitched a little too high. "I've been leading the systems integration team, and today I'll show you how our innovations align with Johnson Dynamics' requirements." He clicked the remote, and a set of slides appeared on the screen. I leaned back, pen resting against my notepad. The first slide was cluttered numbers thrown together without context. He pushed through his points, quickly tripping over jargon, repeating buzzwords with little explanation. A few managers shifted uncomfortably. Richard tapped his pen once against the table. I stayed quiet at first, but by the third slide it became impossible to ignore. "Michael," I said evenly, "can you clarify how your cost projections align with the risk assessments we submitted last quarter? The numbers don't seem to match." His eyes flickered toward me, irritation flashing. "That's because we adjusted priorities. We wanted to show flexibility." "Flexibility is good," Richard said slowly, "but accuracy is better. Can you provide the data set behind these assumptions?" Michael's face paled slightly. He clicked again, fumbling through files. "I delegated that analysis. The final report should have been uploaded." The silence that followed was deafening. Delegated. The one word no one wanted to hear in a room where precision meant millions of dollars and national trust. One of Orion's senior directors, a woman named Dr. Mayat Patel, spoke carefully. "Michael, your team was responsible for these numbers. If the foundation is missing, the entire pitch falls apart." I leaned forward, my voice calm but deliberate. "Passing responsibility doesn't fix the gap. Can you right now explain the risk mitigation in detail?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. A drop of sweat traced down his temple. "It was supposed to be Jordan's section," he muttered. He must not have finalized it." Richard's pen tapped again, sharper this time. "Jordan didn't answer me today." "You do," Michael stammered, flipping aimlessly through the deck. His confidence unraveling with every second. I caught the glance of another Orion manager across the table, his lips pressed, thin eyes cast down. They all knew. The tension snapped when Richard leaned forward, voice low but cutting. "Michael, this was your responsibility. Shifting blame doesn't erase what's missing. Either you own it or this partnership stalls." The words hit like a hammer. Michael's shoulders hunched, his earlier bravado shrinking to nothing. He muttered something about following up, but the damage was already done. The room had seen through him. I let the silence stretch before I spoke again, this time not as a sister, but as a chairwoman. "If the data isn't ready, Johnson Dynamics can't proceed on blind trust. This contract requires accountability, not excuses." Every head turned slightly toward me. Michael's face flushed crimson. For once he had no retort. Richard closed his folder with a quiet snap. "We'll reconvene next week. Until then, Michael, get your house in order. One more presentation like this, and someone else will take your place." No one argued. The meeting adjourned, but the silence was heavier than before. As chairs scraped and papers shuffled, Michael avoided my gaze, his hands trembling as he gathered his laptop. His reputation had cracked in front of the very people who once saw him as the rising star. Walking out, I caught Aunt Linda waiting near the lobby, her sharp eyes taking in everything. She whispered as I passed, just loud enough for me to hear. "Sometimes failure speaks louder than success ever could." Her words lingered. Michael's mask had slipped again, but this time, not just in front of family or neighbors. It was in front of the very stage he had built his identity on, and that stage was starting to collapse. The morning after the tense board meeting, I arrived at Orion for a smaller strategy session. The atmosphere in the glass-walled conference room was different from the grandeur of the gala or the high-stakes leadership review. This was the kind of meeting where ideas got tested, where colleagues challenged each other, and where respect was either built or broken. Michael was already there, sitting near the head of the table, his sleeves rolled up as if he had spent the night working hard. But I knew better. He had the look of someone who was overcompensating. I took my seat at the far end, quietly flipping open my folder. A couple of managers nodded politely at me. One of the senior engineers, a woman named Rachel, gave me a brief smile before adjusting her laptop. Michael cleared his throat, waiting for the room to quiet down. "Before we start," he said, leaning forward, "I think it's important to recognize that not all success in this industry is earned the hard way. Some of it is just luck, connections, timing. We all know how some people land in positions they don't really deserve." His eyes flicked toward me for just a second, quick enough that only a few noticed, but sharp enough to make his meaning clear. I didn't move. I didn't give him the satisfaction of reacting. But the air shifted. Rachel's eyebrows knit together and another manager, David, shifted in his chair. Michael pressed on, mistaking the silence for agreement. "Take our latest contract discussions," he said smoothly. "We all know I've been the one in the trenches managing the technical side. Yet somehow the final authority—" He paused, glancing directly at me. "This time rests with people who just happen to be in the right place at the right time." My pen tapped softly against the folder. I had learned long ago that silence could be louder than words. Rachel closed her laptop slowly and looked straight at Michael. "With all due respect, Michael, the final authority rests with the person who was trusted by both Orion and our partner to oversee the contract. That person is Caroline." The words landed like a stone in still water. The ripples spread fast. David leaned forward, arms crossed. "Exactly. Let's not rewrite reality. Caroline is the one who reviewed the deal, signed off on compliance, and negotiated terms. Not you." Michael's smirk faltered. "I provided the groundwork," Rachel cut him off, her tone sharp. "You provided data. Data that was incomplete. If Caroline hadn't caught those errors, Orion would have been embarrassed in front of the board. So let's not pretend she didn't earn her seat at the table." A hush fell over the room. Michael's face went red, his jaw tightening. For once, his usual charm wasn't working. I spoke, then, my voice calm. "This isn't about luck or favoritism. It's about results. And in this business, results speak louder than stories." The silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum of the projector. Michael stared at me, his pride unraveling thread by thread. That was the moment his colleagues, the same ones who used to laugh at his jokes and nod at his boasts, were no longer buying the illusion. They weren't mocking him outright, but their refusal to back him was humiliating enough. The meeting moved on. Charts were presented, deadlines debated, but Michael remained quiet, his notes untouched. I could feel his anger simmering from across the table, but he couldn't find a way to claw back what he'd lost. Later that evening, I drove home through the quiet streets of Helena, the Montana sun dipping low, painting the horizon in deep orange. My phone buzzed. It was a call from Mom. I hesitated before answering, but finally slid my thumb across the screen. Her voice came through shaky. "Caroline, your brother told me what happened today. They embarrassed him. He's afraid he might lose his job." I said nothing, just listening to the way her words trembled. "He's not perfect," she rushed on, "but he's still my son. He worked so hard, and now everything might fall apart. Please, could you talk to the board? Put in a word for him, help him keep his position." My grip tightened on the wheel. For a moment, I thought back to all those years of silence. The graduation they skipped, the dinners where my achievements were invisible, the constant comparisons that always left me lesser. And now she was asking me to erase his mistakes. "Mom," I said quietly, "you know I can't do that. This isn't about me punishing him. This is about accountability. He made his choices, and now he has to face them." There was silence on the other end. I almost thought she had hung up, but then her voice returned smaller than before. "I just don't want to see him destroyed." I pulled into my driveway, cutting the engine. My reflection stared back at me from the dark window. Maybe being held accountable isn't destruction, I said softly. Maybe it's the only chance he has to change. Mom didn't reply. I ended the call feeling the weight of it settle over me. The realization came that night not in the boardroom, but in the quiet of my own home. My phone buzzed again, this time a message from Rachel. For what it's worth, you handled today with more grace than most people could. He needed to be exposed. We've all seen it coming. I stared at the message for a long while, then set the phone down. Michael thought the company was his stage, that he could twist every story and play the hero. But now the mask has slipped, and I knew the cracks were only beginning to show. What came next would decide not just his career, but the balance of our family itself. By the end of that week, whispers had already made their way from Orion's corridors to the sidewalks of Helena. Small towns have long memories, and word travels fast when someone falls from a pedestal. I noticed it first at the grocery store. Mrs. Duffy, the neighbor who used to smirk when Michael boasted about his projects, gave me a tight smile and said nothing when I walked by. Behind me, I caught the faint murmur of two other women. Did you hear? His sister is the one running the show, not him? Their words weren't cruel, just tinged with that small-town satisfaction when someone who flaunted too much finally stumbled. At home, I poured myself tea and stared out at the fading light. Karma wasn't abstract anymore. It had legs, and it was walking straight into Michael's life. The next turning point came sooner than anyone expected. Orion hosted a small gathering at a local lodge. Nothing fancy, just a networking mixer meant to smooth things over with clients after a tense quarter. Employees brought their families, and Amanda, Michael's wife, was radiant when she first arrived. She wore a green silk dress, her hair pinned neatly, and she smiled for every camera. But I could see the tightness in her jaw, the way she clutched her wine glass a little too hard. Michael stood beside her, trying to keep his usual charm alive, greeting colleagues with his trademark grin. He laughed too loudly at jokes, and gestured too broadly like a man desperate to keep his mask from slipping. During the evening, I kept my distance, chatting quietly with Rachel and a couple of other managers. But I had a clear view of Michael and Amanda. He leaned down to whisper something in her ear. She stiffened. A few minutes later, she pulled away, her smile gone. As the night went on, the strain grew visible. I heard Amanda's voice rise slightly. Near the buffet table, sharp enough to turn a few heads. You promised me stability, Michael. You swore this promotion meant security for us. Michael glanced nervously around, lowering his tone, but Amanda didn't back down. Her voice carried just enough for the people around to catch every word. Stability, she snapped. All I see is failure and lies. You told everyone you were leading that contract when the truth is, you couldn't even hold your own in front of your team. The room hushed. Conversations slowed as heads began to turn. Michael's face went pale. He reached for her arm, whispering, "Not here, Amanda, please." But Amanda had had enough. She pulled her arm free, her voice cracking but steady. You let your pride ruin everything. You dragged our family's name through gossip, and now people look at us with pity. The words struck harder than anything I could have said, because this wasn't me calling him out in a boardroom. This was his own wife in public, stripping away the facade. I watched colleagues exchange glances, their expressions shifting from polite amusement to discomfort, then to recognition. The truth wasn't just whispered anymore, it was displayed in the open, undeniable. Amanda's voice grew louder, shaking now with raw frustration. You kept saying Caroline was just lucky, but everyone here knows she's the one they trust, not you, and you can't stand it. The humiliation was doubled, social and personal, professional and intimate. Michael stood frozen, gripping his empty glass like it might anchor him. But nothing could stop the tide. I didn't intervene. I simply observed, letting the silence after Amanda's words weigh heavy in the room. Some colleagues looked at me as if expecting me to either confirm or deny. I gave them nothing but a steady, unreadable gaze. Came when Amanda placed her glass down hard on the nearest table and walked straight out of the lodge, her heels echoing on the wooden floor. Michael stayed behind, his composure, shattered shoulders slumped. For once there was no smirk, no witty remark to patch the damage, just a man exposed. Later, as I stepped out into the crisp Montana night, Rachel caught up with me. "That was brutal," she said quietly. "But maybe it's the only way he'll ever see himself clearly." I didn't answer right away. I thought of Amanda's trembling hands, of Michael's pale face, of the ripples spreading wider and wider through our town. For years I carried the weight of his arrogance alone. Now the world was carrying a piece of it too. And yet, even as his mask crumbled in front of everyone, I knew Michael wasn't done fighting. Pride like his doesn't disappear, it lashes out. And the next battle would hit closer to home than ever before. The night I returned to my mother's house, the air inside felt heavier than the Montana sky before a storm. The curtains were drawn tight, though the faint glow of street lamps seeped in, spilling across the old rug that had seen decades of our family's arguments and silences. Mom sat hunched on the sofa, a crumpled tissue in her hand, eyes swollen from tears. Michael slouched in the armchair opposite her, his hair disheveled, his tie loosened, the weight of defeat written across his face. I stood by the doorway, unwilling to sink into that space, unwilling to let myself blend into the familiar picture of favoritism that had defined us for so long. "Caroline." Mom whispered, her voice fragile as glass. "Please. He's still your brother. Can't you forgive him? Can't you help him just this once?" Her plea was not demanding. It was desperate. The kind of desperation that clings to hope, even when hope is gone. She wanted our family to look whole again, to erase the fractures as if words could glue them shut. I met her gaze steady and unflinching. "Mom, this isn't about forgiveness. This is about choices. He made his, and now he has to live with them." Michael let out a bitter laugh, the sound low and jagged. "You think—" "I don't know." His voice trembled, the mask of arrogance slipping for the first time in years. "You think I haven't realized how badly I've failed. I've been jealous of you since we were kids, Caroline. Always. You were the quiet one, the overlooked one, but you still managed to build something real. And me." His eyes darted away, his shoulders sagging. "All I did was pretend I was better." Mom pressed the tissue to her lips, muffling a sob. The admission was raw, almost unbelievable coming from him. For years I had been the shadow in this house, the silent one, while he filled the space with noise. Now here he was, unraveling in front of us both. "I never needed your approval, Michael," I said, my tone even but sharp enough to cut through the silence. "All I ever wanted was respect. And you couldn't even give me that." His head snapped up, eyes wide, but there was no retort, no smirk. Only a man stripped of excuses. Mom reached across the coffee table, her hands trembling as she tried to grasp mine. "Please, Caroline. If you don't help him, he could lose everything. His career, his future." I gently pulled my hand away. He already lost what matters most, the respect of the people around him. That's not something I can restore for him. He has to earn it himself. The silence that followed was suffocating. Michael leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. I don't know how he muttered, voice breaking. I don't even know where to start. I stood taller, pulling my coat from the back of a chair. The sound of the fabric brushing against the wood filled the room, louder than it should have been. My voice was calm, final. "Then maybe it's time you learn. Without me cleaning up after you. Without Mom making excuses. On your own." Mom's sobs grew quieter, as if even she knew nothing could turn the tide. Michael's shoulders shook, though whether from anger, shame, or grief I couldn't tell. But I knew one thing: this was the first time in his life he had to face himself without a shield. Came in the way I walked toward the door, heels steady against the worn wooden floorboards. Each step felt like shedding years of silence, of comparisons, of being the one underestimated. At the doorway I turned, letting my eyes sweep over them one last time. Mom's head bowed in her hands. Michael slumped and broken, finally exposed for who he truly was. "I don't hate you," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "I just refuse to live in your shadow anymore." With that I opened the door. The cool Montana night rushed in, sharp and bracing, wrapping around me like freedom. I stepped outside, not looking back. The family I left behind was fractured, left to face the consequences of years of denial. But I was done carrying their weight. A new chapter was waiting when I would write on my own terms. The city welcomed me back with the hum of yellow cabs and the glow of skyscrapers against the night sky. New York had always been where I built my life in silence, brick by brick, while my family in Montana believed I was wandering without purpose. Returning here after everything that happened felt different. I wasn't slipping back into anonymity. I was stepping into my own space with clarity. At my office the next morning, sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, scattering across the polished table where my team had gathered. Reports, charts, and deadlines filled the conversation, but underneath it all was a sense of stability. I looked around at the people who respected me for my work, not my last name, not the illusion of success. Respect was earned here every single day, and it was mutual. Between presentations, my mind wandered back to Montana. To the dinner table where it all started, Michael's smirk still vivid in memory. The best thing you can do is sit quietly. You'll never be successful like me. His words had stung at the time, sharp enough to silence the room. Now they barely registered as more than a bitter joke. I thought of how quickly that confidence had crumbled when the truth surfaced. How colleagues stopped shielding him, how his wife's anger spilled out in public, how even Mom could no longer deny the truth. That night at the table had been his stage, but the gala, the meetings and the confrontations that followed revealed the real story. And it wasn't mine to write, it was his. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had mocked me for being quiet, for not flaunting every step of my path. Yet in the end, the silence I carried was my strength. My work spoke louder than any boast. My patience outlasted his pride. As the day wound down, I lingered in the quiet of my office. The city stretched out before me, vast and unbending, just like the journey I had taken to get here. For years I had let their voices define me, the comparisons, the dismissals, the favoritism. But standing here now, I realize something simple and powerful. Success never needed their permission. Respecting myself has been the turning point. I didn't need Michael's approval. I didn't even need Mom's acknowledgement. What I needed was my own recognition of the work I had done, the battles I had fought alone, and the victories no one had cheered for. The past weeks had been messy, painful, and raw. Yet walking through them, I found a clarity I had never known. Family could break you, but they could also sharpen you. Their doubts became the fire that forged my resolve. Their mockery became the backdrop to my quiet rise. In a small private moment that afternoon, my assistant knocked on the door, bringing in a new contract draft. On top of the folder was a note from the Orion CEO. "Glad to have you as our partner. Your leadership speaks for itself." I held the note for a moment, feeling the weight of what it meant. Not just validation, but recognition from the very circle where Michael had once believed he was untouchable. I leaned back in my chair, a faint smile tugging at my lips. That dinner, that cruel remark, it no longer had power over me. If anything, it was proof that life has a way of circling back, handing people the mirror they try so hard to avoid. And now, to anyone listening to this story, I want to leave you with this: success doesn't come from applause at the dinner table. It doesn't come from siblings who mock you or relatives who overlook you. It comes from the quiet, consistent steps you take when no one is watching. It comes from respecting yourself enough to keep building even when they doubt you. If you've ever been underestimated, laughed at, or told you would never make it, I want to hear your story. Share it. Let others know that respect for yourself is the greatest victory you can claim. Because at the end of the day, titles fade, but self-worth, that is where